cantata to come next December 24th. And John, you're in deck. You can't get out of it next year. It's quite to have three Esthers in one congregation. Because actually, my name is Esther Diane, and I go by Diane. So I'm Esther the second, reading scripture this morning. So if you want to open in your Bibles to Job, it's on page 496 in the Pew Bible. This is definitely a man of God. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the earth. His sons used to take turns holding feasts in their homes, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom. Job's first test. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Well, very well then. Everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Wow. What a role model he is. This is the word of God.
I want to thank everyone for their involvement in the service this morning. Is this thing on? Oh, I shut it off. Silly me. There we go.
I want to thank everyone. There's been lots of involvement this morning, and I love that. I love when God's people serve, and lots of help this morning, and so I'm so grateful for that. Wow. A couple things before we get into this. Pray for the elders this week because they gather for the first time, the new board, on Tuesday at 6:30. And the first item on their agenda will be to identify leadership among them, assigning a chair and a vice chair amongst the board. So pray for that God would put leadership in place that He wants for us and that the elders want for the congregation. So pray for them on Tuesday. And again, we're so grateful for our current elders from last year, as well as those who've come on board and being willing to serve. So let's remember them in prayer, and we'll give you a heads up next week as far as the results of that meeting. A little birdie also told me this morning, where are they? Jack and Pearl, where are you? There. Do you guys have a special anniversary? 61 years or something like that? I heard about this. Now, I'm trying to read Pearl's face. I didn't get permission to do that, but somebody gave me permission to do that. But we just wanted to wish you a happy anniversary, and God bless you and keep you. Anyone else celebrating something special like that, and I don't know about it, congratulations as well. So, when storms come, some reflections on the life of Job. I have never preached through the book of Job. Not that I can remember anyway, and I think I would have remembered that if I did. And the title for this series, I kind of was inspired by the book by the same name, When Storms Come, written by Dr. Tom Dow. Dr. Thomas Dow, he was my president of Emmanuel Bible College when I was there. He's with Jesus now, and he wrote a book called When Storms Come, and he bases it on the life of Job. And so as I was preparing and reading through Job, I thought of that book, and I thought, When Storms Come. I don't think Dr. Dow would mind if I ripped off that title. And so we got it designed here too. For the next number of weeks, we'll be in the book of Job together. So if you want to follow me, if you want to start reading the book for yourself at home throughout the week, just start reading it. It is quite a book. And even as Diane read the first chapter for us this morning, he was indeed a very, very godly man. So when storms come, the inevitability of storms, I thought we would start there, but actually I'm going to just start with a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you again for your word and for this ancient book and how it speaks to us. Doesn't answer all of our questions, God, it certainly doesn't. But it is a testimony, a life who journeys with you through intense suffering and grief. And I pray that you will just guide us together as we don't go necessarily verse by verse, Father, but as you guide us in some of the truths in this book. And just, Lord, keep my heart and keep my mind on track with you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So the inevitability of storms. Today, we're kind of getting pretty used to having advanced warning to a storm, aren't we? Our weather predicting technology is getting better and better. And we're getting good warning, aren't we? We're getting pretty good advance warning 2 or 3 days in advance that a storm is coming. But you remember a day, and I actually remember a day when we didn't have that kind of warning system in place. And sometimes a storm would catch you off guard, and you weren't ready, and you weren't prepared. You didn't have those batteries. You didn't have those water bottles in place and the generator full of gas or whatever it might be. Storms can come suddenly. There's actually in the New Testament a few different storms that come up in the Gospels, in the book of Acts, that catch people off guard. But the question really isn't this morning, if a storm comes, it's when. It's when a storm comes. And I'm thinking both literally and figuratively, metaphorically for our lives. If it's not an actual physical storm we're dealing with, and we've dealt with a couple doozies so far, haven't we? If it's not a physical storm, it's a spiritual storm. It's an emotional storm, a health issue storm in our lives. And a storm hits, it rains on everyone, right? When a storm comes, the rain or the snow falls on us all. Whoever we are, it falls on us all. Good or bad, righteous or wicked, the rain falls on each and every one of us. No one gets a bye on a storm. No one gets a bye, on it. I remember that great tsunami on Boxing Day of 2004. You'll remember it as well. Waves over 100 feet high, killing over 200,000 souls. And I remember that Boxing Day tsunami. I also remember what I would call unreflective preachers talking about how this is God's judgment on the wicked, on that part of the world. God's washing away all of the wickedness. And I'm like, are you serious? Am I hearing you right? Like, what are you talking about? That tsunami washed away both the godly and the ungodly. It washed away believers in Jesus and unbelievers. It washed everyone away. Why are you using this as an opportunity to say this is the specific divine judgment on that part of the world? It was very unreflective of certain preachers when this all happened. It was very uncompassionate as well. The fact is, it was a tragedy beyond immensity, and it was a cause for deep mourning and deep sorrow and grief. My point is, a storm doesn't make distinctions. It falls on everyone. And so enter Job here. Enter this man in this book. Here's a guy, a righteous man, a good man, a great man, a faithful man, who in one day loses so much. Talk about being hit by a tsunami of grief and loss. And certainly Job didn't see it coming, did he? He had no warning. There was no warning system. He had no warning for this storm. And I think I mentioned it already. Many of you can relate to that, right? You can relate. You can think of a day when life changed for you overnight, literally. The news came, or the call came, or the doctor's report came, or the conversation happened, and bam, you are in a storm, and everything changed. Yet I don't think, when we read this book, I don't think for you or me, and I pray you never will experience the storm that Job did, the intensity of the suffering that this fella endured. So let's wade in to chapter 1 together. The book of Job is very old. It's very old. It's a very ancient book, actually. The dialogue section of the book is written in the most difficult and archaic Hebrew in the Old Testament. So the language itself is archaic. The language, the age of the Hebrew in the book is very old. It's very ancient. And there is no mention here of the Mosaic Law. There's no reference to Abraham, to the covenants. And so a lot of scholars believe that this book and this man date to the time of the patriarchs. He was quite possibly a contemporary of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, living at the same time of them, or actually predating them, living before them. So this is why the book kind of stands out. Scholars over the years just don't know where to put it. A lot of people believe that it was Moses who actually penned the book, penned the story, because Moses seems to have been the one in the Bible who recorded the oldest literature that we have, the oldest Hebrew, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. So a lot of scholars believe it was Moses, but we really don't know. But we do know it's old. Probably Job lived somewhere between 2,000 and 1,700 years before Christ. So he dates to the time of the patriarchs. And again, most likely a contemporary of Abraham or Isaac or Jacob, or predating them. Look at the first verse. What a great way to start a story. Doesn't it just kind of suck you in? In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. Like, how can you not read that first line and go, oh, let's get into this? Like, especially the land of Uz. Like, it sounds like, I don't know. It's Uz, by the way. It's not ooze. It's not us. It's Uz. Not Oz either. Kind of things. In the land of Oz, there was Dorothy. No. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. What a great opening. Well, where was Uz? More maybe specifically, who was Uz? I put a map on the screen there. I don't know if you can see it. Obviously, the little square there is a very special place, a very special land in our world. That's the land of Israel there. So you have some perspective. And there's Uz, just east of the Jordan, east of the land of Canaan. And Uz, I want to get this right, he was actually the grandson of Shem, one of the three sons of Noah. Ham, Shem, and Japheth. They were Noah's sons after the flood. And Uz was Shem's grandson. And so the places, the names in blue are the ancestors of Shem and where they settled in the east. And look at them, most of them east, so becoming Arab nations, Arab peoples. And there's Uz right there, really close to the land of Canaan, but east of the Jordan, So this is where he came from. In the land of Uz, there lived a man named Job, right there. That's where Uz settled. So a little bit of history there for you, and I hope the map helps. What do we glean about Job here in this book as this first chapter begins? What do we glean about his life a little bit? Well, we find out in the first chapter about his faith, about his family, and about his fortune. If you can remember that, 3 F's for you. His faith, his family, and his fortune. Consider first his faith. Verse 1, this man was blameless and upright. He feared God and he shunned evil. And God himself repeats this description of there's structure in the story. There's parallelism in chapter 1 and 2. So God himself repeats this description of Job to Satan and later in chapter 2. And he declares this. This is a blameless and upright man. The sense of the Hebrew word isn't perfection. It's not that he's perfect because he had a sinful nature like all of us. But he was without sin. He was blameless. He was upright. He was a man of integrity. And it's amazing thinking about the fact of who he was and where he came from and the patriarchs before Abraham, before the Mosaic law. How did he get to know Yahweh? How did he get to know the true God? And know, he's obviously responding to general revelation. To what we can know about God is found in what he has created. And he's in tune with his conscience, and he knows righteousness, and he knows wickedness. He knows purity and impurity. And he chooses an upright, blameless life. I think, Diane, I heard you say, this is a great man. He was. I am not like this man. Like, I know myself, and we'll get to his friends. I think I'm more like one of his friends than I am like Job. This was a godly man, a faithful man, a good man, a wise man too, right? Because we know from Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's in Psalm 111 and Proverbs chapter 9. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So somehow Job became a God-fearing man, responding to the revelation that God gave to him. And it says here that he shunned evil. He shunned it. The Hebrew word used for shunned means to turn aside, to depart, to avoid, to take or put away, to dispose of. And the Hebrew word used for evil is ra, which means bad or malignant, unpleasant, and evil. So putting it all together, it means that Job distanced himself from evil things. That is, all things that God opposes, the things that God hates, Job distanced himself from those things. He put them away in his life. And he was an upright and blameless man. He was a man of faith, right? He was a man of faith because we know from the scriptures, what is it that makes a person righteous? Faith. Faith makes us righteous. There's a couple other places in the scriptures, not many. There's a couple other places that mention Job, and they also reference his character, his righteousness. This is from Ezekiel 14. I'm not going to comment on the theology around what's going on in Ezekiel 14. I just want you to see how Job is referred to. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, if a country sins against me by being unfaithful, and I stretch out my hand against it to cut off its food supply, send famine upon it, and kill its men and their animals, even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they could save only themselves by their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord. So here's God himself declaring the righteousness of Job. That, well, again, there's context to this passage, and I'm not here to talk about Ezekiel 14. We're here to talk about Job right here and just how righteous he is. And then James. Let's go to the New Testament. A guy like this has got to be mentioned in the New Testament as well. Well, here's James 5. Listen to what is said. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. And as you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Here's a reference to the perseverance of Job. Actually, Job is kind of proverbial in our lives, right? You refer to someone having the patience of Job. So we have these snapshots of who this man was. And especially here in chapter 1, we're considering his faith. Consider his family. There's definitely a description of his faith and his righteousness. How about this? Consider his family. Verse 2 and verse 4 and 5. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. 7, 8, 9, 10. 7 sons, 3 daughters. Verse 4 and 5, actually, these two verses help us see family life, but also how his faith was integrated into his family life. Look at verse 4 to 5. His sons used to take turns holding feasts in their homes. They were party animals, maybe? And they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And oh, good, the brothers and sisters at least seem to get along. That's good. And when a period of feasting had run its course, Job, he would send and have them purified. Don't know what that looked like. But early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. Isn't that, the implication there is the parties were regular as well, right? So a little glimpse into family life. He's referred to as a priest later in the book. So here's this pastoral priest-like father interceding to God on behalf of his children, purifying them. The reference to sacrifice is amazing, considering if Job lived before Abraham, if Job lived before Moses, he already had this sense of approaching God, that sacrifice, that blood was required. Kind of a foreshadowing. What's he doing in our terms now? This side of the sacrifice, he's pleading the blood of Jesus over his kids. He's praying for them. He's interceding for them in case they sinned. So obviously he's a man of prayer. He's a spiritual man. And he's a man that has spiritual concern for his children. Not that he can save them. There's nothing there saying that. They're making choices. Looks like it's a regular habit of these house parties going on. But he's interceding for them, and he's praying for them, and he's showing spiritual concern for his kids. Wow, there's kind of a whole another message there in Job's family life. Consider his family. Consider his faith. Consider his fortune in this chapter. This is incredible. It really is. Like the patriarchs, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Job was very wealthy, very rich. And how do we know that? Well, back then, what was wealth was measured in flocks and herds. The wealthier you were, the more cattle you had and sheep you had and camels you had. I experienced this firsthand in Afar territory, in nomadic shepherding-like cultures still today. The wealthiest families have the most camels. They have the most donkeys. They have the most sheep. Wealth back then in ancient time was measured by flocks and herds. Verse 3, he owned 7,000 sheep. Some of you farmers can be shaking your head now. 3,000 camels. That's huge because G told us the value of a camel in American dollars, and now I've told you that and I can't remember what he said. It was like over $1,000 anyway. 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys. John and Shirley, I remember when you had donkeys. Imagine having 500 donkeys. And had a large number of servants. Well, do you understand why? Why would he have to have such a large number of servants to take care of this large number of animals? A lot of them. Imagine feeding them every day and watering them every day and guiding them to the water hole and all of that. So you can have fun trying to calculate his net worth in terms of today's money. And you can look it up. People have fun trying to calculate what was this guy worth when you do the math on all of his flocks and herds. So one person I found, if you do the math in today's funds in terms of calculating what the value of all of this livestock, one calculation I found puts it all at 50 plus million US dollars. If you looked at it today. 50 plus million US dollars in today's money. He is a wealthy man. And the summary of this man in the first chapter, look at verse 3. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. And if I put that map back on there, that East, he was the greatest man among all of the peoples of the East. And I would say not just because of his wealth, but because of his faith, his reputation, his relationship with God, how he was a shepherd, a priest in the land. He was an example. I think Diane used that word as well. The greatest man among all the people of the East. How would you like that on your gravestone? None of us would do it, right? Because we're just way too humble for that. But imagine that, on your gravestone, the greatest man in Grey County. But he truly was. And that's not just the testimony of the author of the book. It's really the affirmation of God who brought this to our attention. And a question for you at coffee time. What impresses you? Don't answer right now. What impresses you most about Job? Talk about that at coffee time or at home later. What impresses you most about this man? Well, we could close the book now by saying, and Job lived happily ever after. Right? In the land of Uz, there was a great man named Job. And he lived happily. This is not one of those fairy tales. This is not one of those stories. This is a very real human story. It's a story of suffering, yes, but it's not a theodicy. It's not, in my opinion, a theology of suffering. It doesn't answer all of our questions around the problem of evil and suffering. And it certainly doesn't answer the question of why horrible things happen to really good people. It doesn't even answer that question for us. Yet it is a story. His friends try to answer that question, but it all falls short. This is a story, an account, an ancient record of a person of faith, a righteous person journeying with God through intense suffering, through circumstances way more than a person could ever bear. If you ever hear that statement again, oh, God won't give you more than what you can handle. Are you kidding me? Just turn to the book of Job. Turn to chapter 1 and read it. Are you saying this is, oh, God won't give you more than what you can bear? What are you talking about? This is way more than a person can bear, can handle. That whole saying comes from, the context of that is temptation. God won't let you be tempted more than what you can bear. God never said that He won't put us through things more than what we can handle. Just talk to someone who's lost a loved one. They'll tell you, it's more than you can bear. And this is Job. This journeying with God through intense suffering. I had a conversation with a friend of mine. He's another chaplain. He's a chaplain at the Kincardine Hospital. We were talking about Job. And he said, to me, the book is not about a theodicy. It's not a theology of suffering. It's a prayer book. This is a book of prayer. Job is a book of prayer, how you journey with God through grief and through loss. And we'll get to his friends and how you can hear messages from people that aren't really helpful. People who talk too much. We'll get to all that. But chapters 1 and 2 really serve as the prologue, the introduction to this book, to the man, to the fact that storms are going to come in our lives. And the book as a whole, if you notice, there in chapters 1 and 2, in the introduction, there are like 5 scenes. And the scenes bounce between earth and heaven, right? It starts on the land of Uz and earth and what happens, and then it bounces to heaven, to the realm of God, and then it bounces back to earth, and then it bounces back to heaven, and there's 5 scenes. And to me, it's kind of interesting that it does that, because happening at the very same time in our lives, in our physical lives, in our circumstances, in our lives of suffering, there is a spiritual reality. There is the realm of God. There is the care of God. There is the sovereignty of God. There is what God allows in our lives. And I don't have the answers to all of that because it's challenging material here when we read it. But the fact that there is this heaven and earth and heaven happening at the same time is kind of interesting to me. Physical and spiritual realities occur at the very same time. Contrary to Western thought, there are both physical and spiritual realities to our lives. Western thought, and I see it even in Western medicine being a chaplain, it's all about the physical, right? Somebody comes in the hospital, it's about the biology, and I get that. You want to fix the biology. You want to fix the physical problem. You want to help with the pain. You want to do what you can. But spiritually, this is a person that isn't just biology. There's a spirit there. There's emotions there. There's fears there. There's spirituality there. And that's why I'm glad Grey Bruce Health Services has spiritual care, as well as wonderful nurses and doctors to care for the body. They do a lot of spiritual care too. I know you do. But anyway, my point is physical, spiritual realities are existing at the same time. So like look at this, for example, chapter 1 is just 3 scenes, and then chapter 2, next week, there's 2 more scenes. But the first scene here is earth, the land of Uz. Chapters 1 to 5, and that's Job's faith, family, and fortune, and we've already looked at those verses. Scene 2, notice, it bounces to heaven. it bounces to the Lord's presence, right? The Lord's presence in chapter 1, verse 6 to 12. It's the spiritual realm, the realm of the angels. And yes, Satan is included here, right? If you start, one day the angels, verse 6, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to him, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." The same description of Job from verse 1. And then there's this exchange that happens, right? This accusation, right? This is the serpent talking here. "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." Man, it's a satanic tone, isn't it? The Lord said to Satan, "Very well." I guess that's why they call it a test. "Very well, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Satan is called the accuser. In the New Testament, the accuser of the brethren, right? This is what he does. He accuses us before God. I had an amazing conversation with one of you in the past about this passage. And the question was, why is Satan even here? Like, how can he even be in the presence of God? How can he, it seems like such a jovial conversation between God and Satan. And we had a little bit of that conversation. How can evil be in the presence of a good God? Well, why can it be? And why can't Satan be in God's? Is God not over all? Did we just not sing above all powers, above all thrones, above all God reigns? God is not threatened by evil. He is not thwarted by evil. He certainly isn't intimidated by Satan in his presence. God can handle it, and he can handle him. So evil doesn't threaten God. He isn't polluted by it, nor can he be. Who is like our God? So I got thinking about that. How could he be there? Okay, yeah, God's over everything. It's not a big deal. Well, it is, but it isn't. You know what I'm saying? But what is he doing there in the presence of God? He's accusing. And that's what he does. He goes on and he sets this up, right? And then what happens? Scene 3. Scene 2 happens in God's presence, and then it goes back to earth again, to the land of Uz, and absolute calamity in Job's life. And yes, you can't get away from it. God allows this to happen in Job's life. He's God. Look at the scene. Calamity to Job's property, his posterity, his family. Imagine this kind of grief and loss. Starting at verse 13, one day, it's so arbitrary, eh? When Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job, said the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing, and the Sabians attacked and made off with them. They put all the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one here to escape to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came. The fire of God fell down from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came. The Chaldeans formed raiding parties. They swept down on your camels. And what's happening here? The vault is being emptied, folks. The vault is being emptied. The bank account, the stock market's crashing.
All of the wealth is going. They put the servants to the sword. I'm the only one who's escaped. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine. The oldest brother's house, suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert. So now we're talking, what, a tornado, some sort of a huge hurricane force wind. Struck the four corners of the house, it collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. So we get this introduction in the land of who Job was. Then we go to heaven, and this test God allows to happen. Don't touch his body. Don't touch his physical being. That's next week. And then it goes back, and we see what happens in one day. In one day. Imagine that kind of loss. And some of you are parents and grandparents. You get it. Imagine that kind of grief and that loss. Had you have been Job, how would you have reacted to these losses in one day? Probably put up a sign, no more messengers. I want no more message. I'm not home from any more messengers today. What would you think? I must have done something wrong. I must have really got God mad, right? These are common. I must have really made God angry somewhere in my life. Where is God? Maybe you'd think there is no God. There is no God. If there is a God, how could this happen to me? Maybe he'd think, why me? Maybe he'd think, why not me? Maybe he'd think, how could I have prevented this? Is there something I could have done to prevent this from happening? How will I ever recover from this? Or maybe he would have thought this down the road. If all can be lost so quickly, I will never attach myself to anything else ever again. If you can love and lose everything so fast, I will never love again. I'll just detach and isolate myself. These are all ways we can deal humanly with grief and loss. And these are all ways Job could have reacted, but how did he react? We can close with this. Look at the end of the chapter. How did Job respond to this kind of grief and loss? Well, the first thing is grief. Verse 20, at this, Job got up, he tore his robe, and he shaved his head. And you're thinking, what is that about? That was the way the ancients grieved. It's how they showed and demonstrated their intense sorrow. They tore their clothes, they shaved their head, often would sit down in a pile of ashes. Is their culture. It's all signs of grief. So he's grieving. That is the proper response to that kind of loss is grief. Not bypassing grief. It starts there. At this, he got up, verse 20, and he tore his robe and he shaved his head and he fell to the ground in worship. This is where we get an example of how much this man was a man of faith, a man of God. At this very same time, it reads to me, he both grieved and yet he worshiped. He fell to the ground in worship, which is literally what that word means, to fall on your face before God. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Do you see it? He is in relationship with God. Even at this moment. He is at this moment when it all came down, literally, and when the news all came. Two reactions, grief and worship. happening at the very same time. Truly, this man was a great man of God. Look at verse 22. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. That is a miracle, I think. That is miraculous. That is a intensely, deeply spiritual, mature response to the kind of calamity that he experienced. What in my life can be carried off? What in your life can be carried off, can be put to the sword, can be burned up or blown away? Everything. Everything but my faith. Everything but our faith. Everything can be taken away but my love for God and my worship. Same for you. Everything can go except our relationship with God. So far, I think we've gleaned here in chapter 1, when storms come, and they will, when storms come, grieve. When storms come, worship. Worship. Grieve in relationship with God. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. God, what an incredible testimony. What an amazing picture of this man that you raised up in ancient times. Thank you for the record of his life. It's going to challenge us. It's not going to answer all of our questions, and that's going to frustrate us. But God, what it does answer as the book gets started is this is a journey through the storm with you. You're not against us. You're with us in it. You're with us through it. And whatever storm that's speaking to in people's lives this morning, whatever storm coming that it will speak to, I pray that you will help us to honestly journey through the storms of life with you and with one another. In Jesus' name I pray.